Hello YouTube, I'm Andrew Does Hair. You can find my work on Instagram at Andrew Does Hair. So you're a barber or a hairstylist and you're trying to put together your Instagram portfolio to attract new clients or whatever the goal is for your brand or your purpose on Instagram. And you're finding that your haircut photos are very busy. You have a lot of salon in the background there. There's a lot of distractions from the haircut and you want to figure out how to take a picture of a haircut rather than a picture of a haircut in a salon with stuff happening all around it. Now the sort of default method that I see people do when they're attempting to get rid of distractions in the background is they take their client and they put their heels against a wall and they take a mugshot of them. Now I want to say that this is bad for a handful of reasons. You get shadows against the wall, there's no depth in the image, it's not very interesting looking, it's a mugshot. And I think the real problem with this is priority one becomes finding a wall. Finding good lighting becomes at the very least priority two, or a non-factor, like an like something you don't even think about. I'm not gonna say stop doing the mugshot, keep that in your toolbox, but let's talk about some other ways here that you can get rid of a background in a haircut photo so that you can just kind of grow your toolbox, just have like a bigger toolbox of ways that you can display your haircut photos. So the first method I'm gonna talk about here is probably going to be the most effective. What's great about it is you could do it with any camera. It doesn't matter if it's a phone or a fancy dedicated mirrorless or DSLR. This is just a photography principle. So what we're going to talk about here is called compression. And what compression is when the background behind your subject grows in relation to your subject to the point even at times that it becomes unrecognizable. The way you're going to do this is to back up a little bit more than you're used to with your phone or your fancy camera. Just stand a little bit further away and zoom in. It's as simple as that. With a wide lens, which is what the phone's default lens is on the wide side, or if you have any kind of wide lens, it brings in a lot of scene like you're looking at right now. Look at how big my room is here. And the thing is, if we're using that for a haircut photo and we're trying to get rid of the background, it doesn't matter how close or far your haircut is from that wide lens. If I get all the way up in here, you could still see the background. So the way to get rid of the background, as you're seeing playing on the screen here, is if you back up and you zoom in, you cut out that background. This is called compression. I'm actually going to do that right now by moving my camera back and changing lenses. So you can see now in this shot right here, right now, I have much less background in my image because I switched to a tighter lens. Your phone can do this. Obviously, if you buy an interchangeable lens camera, you can get a lens that will do this. But the reason your phone has a telephoto lens is not so you can take a picture of wildlife way over there. It's so you can cut out the background when need be. In fact, you'll notice that if you switch your phone into portrait mode, it'll automatically zoom in. And the reason it does that is when you use a tighter focal length, you're not taking a picture of a salon with a person in it, you're taking a picture of a person and it's compressing the background to be less of a factor in the image. So I posted about this recently on my Instagram and I had a lot of comments saying, wait, how do I zoom in on my phone? If you grab your phone and you pinch the screen when you're gonna go to take a photo, it'll zoom in. Some phone models don't have a telephoto lens. And if that's the case, what you're going to do as you're zooming in is what's called a digital zoom, and it's going to degrade the image quality in order to zoom in. But even if you have some kind of camera that can't zoom and it's just got a fixed wide lens, it's actually not the zoom itself or the tighter focal length itself that is making this change, it's the distance. And so even if you're shooting wide, step back a little further than you're used to and then crop the image later. And you'll find that you'll have way less background in the image than what you're used to shooting up close. So with a phone, this compression thing, you can absolutely get it, but it's somewhat limited. It's one of the limitations you'll find with a phone. The difference between a phone and a fancy camera, if you're shooting with a somewhat wider lens, is like barely any difference. A phone is very, very good these days, but once you start trying to compress the background in this way, you'll find limitations with a phone. And so if you're a barber or hairstylist who's been thinking, well, maybe I should get a fancy camera, this is one of the reasons why. If you were to get a fancy camera, a mirrorless or DSLR with like an 85mm lens, 100mm lens, 135mm lens, you would get so much of this compression that you would never worry about your backgrounds again. And what this compression allows you to do is worry less about what's behind your haircut and worry more about the lighting on your haircut and the actual look of your haircut. Somebody on Instagram who does all of this really well is Brian Aguilar. I've been a big fan of his hair work, obviously, and his photography is phenomenal as well. If you go look at his images, you'll see that there's, a little bit of background context. You could see maybe a plant here or a door frame there, but you don't know where he's shooting. It's not a picture of a salon because he shoots everything very tight, and when you look at the image, all you see is that haircut. The second way you can get rid of a busy background is to expose it out or underexpose it. That's right, we're gonna make it dark. Sometimes when I post pictures that are done this way, I've actually gotten comments where people are like, well, what do you just turn the lights off in the salon? I can't do that, people are working. Let's talk about how every camera actually works. There's a limitation on how bright and dark a camera can perceive at the same time. You'll find with your phone, if you were to like take out your phone and go to take a picture of a scene that is both very bright and relatively dark at the same time, it doesn't even have to be very dark. If you take out your phone and you go to take a picture of a scene like this and you don't tell it to do anything, just take the picture, what it's going to do is expose the image. It's going to choose a brightness of the image that will retain some detail in both the brightest and darkest areas. However, let's say for example on this thing on the screen here, I want to see more detail in that eagle on the wall there. And because it's in a dark area, what I can do with my phone is touch the eagle, which is going to tell it to kind of expose for that. And then if I actually long press on it, I can get this little sun slider dial that gives me control over my exposure. And if I were to lift up that sun slider, it'll brighten up the entirety of the image, which allows me to see more detail in that dark area. And so I can get a more detailed photo of that eagle, even though there's bright stuff in the image. However, it comes at a cost. If I were to go look at the bright area on the photo, these electrical boxes or whatever they are, you'll see that I lost detail there. So in order to save detail in the dark area, I lost detail in the bright area. Now, on the flip side, let's say I wanted a picture of those electrical boxes and I wanted the most detail possible there. If I touch the boxes and I long press to get that sun slider and I pull the slider down to underexpose the image, I'm going to retain the most amount of detail in those bright white boxes with the direct sun on them. However, at the same time, because the camera has a limitation as far as how bright and dark it can see at the same time, now I'm taking the shadow outside on a bright day. It's still not dark. And it looks very dark. We almost basically completely lose that eagle. And so this whole concept here, exposing for the brightest part of the image and allowing the darkest part of the image to just fall to black, this can be a great way to hide a busy background. So notice that I used the word relative a few minutes ago. You don't have to turn off the lights in the salon. You don't have to do anything extreme like that. All you have to do is make sure you have more light on your subject than you have on your background. And what'll happen is, you long press on your model, you slide that exposure down, it'll make the entirety of the scene darker, but because your model is so much brighter than the rest of the scene, they'll still be properly exposed. A great way to do this in the salon is just to use the open front door. I see this a lot on Instagram. And so in the example here on the screen, if I take my model a few feet inside the salon, they're going to be about as bright as the rest of the salon around them. And so when I take the photo and I expose for them, at the very same time, the whole salon is pretty well exposed and I have a lot of busy background in there. But if I take that same model and I move them right next to the door, if I do that, the light is so much brighter there on them that once the camera exposes for their bright face, their bright haircut, then the rest of the salon in that image will fall dark and it becomes hopefully less distracting. So somebody on Instagram who does this very well is Bang My Hair. She takes amazing photos, and I've noticed over the time that I've been following her that she always has this dark, moody background that is very, it gives her photos a very epic feeling to it. Like there is so much focus on that model, and I'm like 99% sure that she's doing this with the front door trick. I think she's standing her models in the front door and just letting the relatively dark salon fall dark in the images. So let's say it's not daytime and you just have salon lights around and there's no sunlight coming in anywhere. All you have to do is set up lights, like I have lights up here. All you have to do is make sure those lights are brighter than the rest of the salon, and if you do that, the salon will fall dark. Now, if you're trying to use lights, ring light, softbox, whatever, things like this, if you're trying to do this in the middle of the day and you're competing with the sun, you're gonna need really, really, really bright lights to black out that salon. And this is actually another benefit of like the fancy cameras. You can get like a real flash, not like, your phone has a flash on it, but I'm talking about like powerful flashes that can go off camera and sit in modifiers and things. So if you look here, I very clearly have a bright midday salon. It's maybe mid-afternoon, but the sun is coming directly into those windows in the back. And using the same principle of exposing for something very bright and allowing everything else to fall dark, if you have like a good enough flash, the one in the video here is by Interfit, called a Honey Badger. But this thing is so bright that it can actually black out the indirect sunlight. It can make the salon look like complete darkness. So whether you get a speed light, which is, a small little flash that goes on camera, or you get a fancy studio light or something, when you're using like a dedicated fancy camera, a mirrorless DSLR, you're able to use flash to control this ability we've been talking about to underexpose things or overexpose things, and you're able to get more control over all of that. But if you're shooting with a phone, just look for relatively bright light next to relatively dark light and shoot your model in the bright light, slightly underexpose it, and black out that background. So the third and final way I'm going to talk about diminishing a busy background here is to blur it out, throw it out of focus, use a shallow depth of field. Now you might sometimes use portrait mode on your phone to try to do this, but you'll find at times, in perfect scenarios it can be wonderful, but it's not always perfect scenarios, and at times I find that portrait mode can still be very busy. Sure, it's blurry, but it's busy, it's distracting. If you have, or if you want a fancy camera, some dedicated camera with an interchangeable lens, what you'll want to look for is a lens with a low aperture, or wide aperture, low f number. So the lower that f number goes on a lens, the blurrier it can make the background. An f2.8 lens will not blur out the background as much as an f1.8 lens, which will not blur out the background as much as an f1.2 lens. So if you get a lens like that, keep in mind also what I said earlier about the compression thing. If you were to get like a 24, 35, or even a 50mm lens, like right now I'm shooting this on a 50mm, background's blurry, but I can still see the background. I can still see what's going on there. And early on in my sort of photography journey, I was getting these 24, 35, 50mm lenses, and I was trying to save up to get the f1.2 models because I thought, lower f number, blurrier background, that's all there is to it. But you have to keep in mind this compression thing that I talked about. If you get an 85, 100, 105, 135 with a low f number, I'm talking, f2, f1.8, f1.4, those are going to completely obliterate the backgrounds, and you're not going to be able to really tell even what the background is. It's kind of how they get that look where all there is behind the haircut is just blur, just a wall of beautiful swirly colors that isn't distracting. You'll find that you get a much smoother, nicer looking background that way with a tighter lens and a lower aperture. Another factor that can play into this is what's called a full frame sensor. So when barbers and stylists reach out to me for camera advice, what I tend to tell them these days is buy a 10-year-old professional camera. A full frame sensor, basically in general terms, it makes your background blurrier. If you were to buy a brand new camera with a full frame sensor, they start at about $1,000. That's kind of a lot for like a beginner who's like, dude, I don't even know if I want to put this much investment in here. But you can find like a Canon 5D Mark II or a Canon 6D original for $400 or less. And these cameras, they're 10, 12 years old, but they have a full frame sensor and no other bells and whistles. So if we're shooting somebody standing there saying cheese in a well-lit room after they got their haircut, you don't need fancy bells and whistles. And so a professional camera from 12 years ago didn't take bad pictures. It just wasn't as fast or as intuitive or as techy or touchscreeny or Wi-Fi-y as modern cameras are. So given the option between a brand new camera with a smaller sensor, a crop sensor, APS-C sensor is what they would call it, if you're going to spend money on a brand new camera with a little tiny sensor because it has bells and whistles, or you have the option to get an older camera with a full frame sensor, if this blurry background thing is very important to you, don't worry about the bells and whistles, get the full frame sensor, and then later upgrade. So hardware aside, whether you're shooting with portrait mode or with a fancy camera with a full frame sensor and a low f number, there is some other factors involved to get this blurry background. As I said, you want your f number to be as low as it goes. So that's a setting in your camera that you can change. Or even in portrait mode, after you take the photo, you can go to edit the photo and alter what the f number is. You'll find that the lower it goes, the blurrier the background is. So if you want more blur, lower f number. But another huge important factor is the closer you focus to your camera, the blurrier the background gets. And so like in this shot of me right now, if I want more background blur, I'll get closer to the lens. And as I come closer, the background gets blurrier. Or conversely, if I decided to stand back here for this video, I don't have a blurry background anymore. Portrait mode on the phone works the same way. They know how the depth effect thing works. So the other thing that's a huge important factor, as you just kind of witnessed, is you want to get your model away from the wall. You want the deepest background possible. If you want to get a depth effect, you need depth. It doesn't matter which camera, lens, app, editing, filter, it doesn't matter what you're using. If you have your model against the wall, you are not getting a blurry background. And if you were to go in and edit it or something and force it to be blurry, it doesn't look natural, it doesn't look nice. What you really want to do is have the deepest background possible to get the blurriest background possible. So I'll say again, don't worry about what's in your background, worry about your light. Find the place with the best light for your haircut so that they look smooth and pretty, and then turn to the angle where the background is the deepest and let your gear just blur out that background and don't worry about it. Somebody who does this really, really well is Big Wes on Instagram. That's X Big Wes X. This guy takes photos of haircuts and nothing else. I mean, what I mean is his background just isn't. He's doing this with a full frame sensor and an 85mm f1.4 lens. But if you go and you look through his images, very, very seldom do you see anything in the background. He's taking a photo of a haircut and nothing else. And that's how he's doing it, is by blurring out the background in this way. So I hope that this video was informative. I hope it was helpful. I hope that you go out and you try all of these things. Just test them. I mean, granted, I'm not saying, hey, run out and buy a light because of this video. Maybe. Go out and research lights because of this video. Go out and research cameras because of this video. I'm not saying run out and buy it tomorrow, but try all of these things that you can. And maybe share this with somebody who also isn't happy with the way that their haircut photos look.